Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do, cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Purina believes no one should have to make the impossible choice between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the podcast with the Financial Freedom. And today I've got a fantastic guest for you from Montreal, Abir Syed. And our conversation today is all good be about e-commerce, and he has achieved 8 figures in his company, and he talks about scaling brands past 8 figures. And it's going to be a fantastic conversation, entrepreneurship, tech, scaling, and I'm really happy to have him on. So Abir, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And briefly chronicle your journey, and I'm really excited to dive into the content and the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, my background is as a CPA. I worked in a traditional set of experiences, the big 4 accounting firms and a startup. Where my career went off the rails, if you will, was when we acquired an e-commerce brand and I was put in charge of running it. So I ran an e-commerce brand for several years, like very hands-on, end-to-end, doing basically everything needed to help it scale and function. And then eventually I also took the opportunity after I left to try building a marketing agency as well. Got a very broad mix of skills, but what I realized is that in the e-commerce world, there's a very staunch need for better financial data and kind of visibility into how to actually understand whether your brand is performing well or not. And given my background on the finance side, as well as the marketing side and the e-commerce side, I felt like it was a perfect fit. So pivoted to just building a CFO and accounting firm that supports e-commerce brands. And I've been doing that for a few years. So up to about 65, 70 people now. It's going pretty smoothly, I'd say.
Turning to the conversation, the one question is, when clients come to you, what is their avatar? What are the problems they're looking to solve for their companies, businesses, and how do they work with you?
Yeah, great question. So generally speaking, it's going to be e-commerce brands that have cracked product market fit to a certain degree. They've figured out how to get that initial traction from an advertising perspective. So they've usually scaled to about $3 to $5 million a year in revenue, and their business is getting a little bit more complex such that there's a need for better financial data so that they can make better decisions. Oftentimes in the very early stages, a founder is at arm's length of every transaction, every little activity in the business. So even if they don't have data or reports or any sort of granularity with how that information is being presented, they just have a gut feeling that's pretty reliable. But as the business gets a bit more complex, as you start going omni-channel, you start advertising on multiple channels, it becomes harder to make good decisions just because of the sheer volume of data and because it's not always happening within arm's reach of their purview. So over time, the need for that better data becomes a lot more important. So they come to us because they want more granular data, they want better reporting, and then they also want the advice that we can provide insofar as what should you be doing when you hit this particular size, when your cash flow looks this way, when you need inventory forecasting, stuff of that nature, what sort of systems you need to implement. Essentially, we're able to provide that finance lens on things, but in a fractional way. So whether you're doing 3 million or 130 million, we're able to scale up to the size that's necessary.
Interesting. How does a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of them listening, majority are 6 figures, smaller portion is 7 figures, either their jobs, some of them have companies. How do you get to 8 figures, and what is the secret sauce?
I'd say that oftentimes the bottleneck that ends up happening is just a recognition of what the actual constraints are for the business to keep on going. For most in the e-commerce world, oftentimes it's a function of advertising, inventory, and cash flow. But for most non-e-commerce businesses, because I tend to deal with a lot of entrepreneurs from various walks of life, The very frequent thing is that they just end up in a place where they don't know how to scale beyond themselves. So oftentimes they hit a cap because they're used to just having their finger in every pie and just knowing what's going on. And that can work to a good degree. I think entrepreneurs have this superpower where they are very good at solving any problem, diving into any sort of issue and figuring it out. But the issue becomes that once you hit a certain size, you can't scale until you start building systems and hiring people and delegating stuff to them. And that's often the Achilles heel for most entrepreneurs. That kind of keeps them at that like low 7-figure range.
Huh. Yeah, interesting. The following question I have for you is, how do you keep e-commerce margins healthy? What is the hidden math behind that?
It comes down to primarily just having a very good understanding of your advertising metrics. I think obviously there's the gross margin component. So just making sure that you're pricing at a point that's high enough relative to how much an item costs you. There's often a lot of optimization there, but generally that's not the place that people get the most loss. It comes down to the advertising side. So just not having an understanding of how much they should be spending on advertising and what sort of a return they're getting, and when a particular acquired customer will pay back, if it's one where they purchase something like consumable. Often that's where people just get very lost. So they just lean on very easy to evaluate metrics, like what's meta ads telling me in the platform as my ROAS. So we'll just kind of look at those easy metrics to kind of make decisions, but that's often a very narrow view of the overall strategy.
Yeah, interesting. Another question I have for you is, you talked about in your early journey, jumping from accounting to advertising. Why did you do that?
So back when I was working at a startup, it was a startup. So we had raised about $60 million. So it was fairly well funded, but I think as most startups go, oftentimes there's a lot of difficulty with having the rubber hit the road, so to speak. So there's a lot of issues with traction. And a lot of times I just felt like I was being a referee or just complaining about this is not working the way it's according to, and we're not really doing properly on revenue here. We have issues over there. And at a certain point, it just became a little bit frustrating that there were a lot of problems with performance in the business, but I didn't actually have the power to directly influence any of it. I was keeping score, I was informing the relevant parties, but at the end of the day, I couldn't make revenue go up as the VP finance. So essentially, when I had this opportunity to step into a place where I'm like, oh, I can just take over the store, I can take over the ads, I can make revenue go up, I was just excited about the opportunity to be a little bit more directly involved in driving performance rather than just evaluating performance.
When you were in the startup world, and there's a lot of parallels with e-commerce, and a lot of e-commerce brands, they raise angel or venture capital. What are investors really looking at when valuing an e-commerce brand?
Most of the time, and it does depend to some degree on the investors, but the vast majority of them are really looking for that opportunity to have a really sizable exit. So they're hoping that something has the potential to scale to a very substantial degree such that it can be sold for something pretty material. So they're really evaluating potential. They're just trying to see is this the kind of thing that can become worth $50 million or more, or 100, depending on obviously the investor and kind of what realm they play in. But really it's that they're just trying to look for that size being able to be hit. They look for those early signs of potential when they're looking at the data that exists, but ultimately it's that.
Another question I have for you is, once you get to this 8 figures, what's the unglamorous truth about scaling past 8 figures?
It's that a lot of it just has to do with getting really good data and processes in place and then just grinding. So it's not that fun, but usually you'll have to implement some sort of inventory management system, or maybe even an ERP. If you're in like that 20 to 30 million range, you just have to make sure that you have very good reports, hire people to be able to handle certain things, have good processes operationally for each one of them to handle the things that they need to, whether that be customer support or the warehouse operations or whatever. It's a lot of just operational stuff, and then just making sure that you stick to that kind of grind and keep going and don't falter and get bored and try to do risky things that could derail the path you're on.
And is the operations optimization the same when scaling to 5 million versus scaling past 8 figures?
I'd say there's a big jump right around 5 million insofar as primarily the types of people that you need to hire. So it comes a little bit to that situation where the founder needs to let go of entire sections or of the business and make sure that they have people in place who can run them, be effective at them, but just make sure that they're still working cohesively. And the other big thing is that usually that's a moment around maybe around 10, 15 million, where they just kind of have to upgrade the types of softwares and data that they use. And that usually means that they have to be a lot more diligent about how they use the systems so that software can actually perform the way it's intended to. And it just becomes a little bit more professionalized, and people sometimes don't like following the rules that much.
Yeah. I know a lot of my colleagues and friends, they're founders, and a lot of them have this trust issue. It's because you talk about getting to a certain point and then like they've basically hit the grind, making seven figures revenue. Everything's dependent upon them. And then when I'm talking to you and scaling past eight figures, you're saying you got to remove the founder, remove the CEO, remove the bottlenecks, get a COO. What are founders obsessing over, and what should they stop obsessing over? What really matters? A lot of them they don't trust, and they've got to see everything, and they're actually impeding progress.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Honestly, it's something I myself have had to work on for the past year, because we're at that point as well where we're moving into kind of, let's call it, the next phase of scale where that is necessary. I can speak to myself and also what I've seen from a lot of the peers that I have and kind of friends who have gone through a similar thing. But there is this, to some degree, perfectionism or obsession with making sure that everything is about as good as it can be. And it comes from a good place, because especially if you are trying to build something ambitious, something special, especially if you work with clients, you want to make sure that everybody's getting the best possible quality and making sure that something is able to align with your vision. But oftentimes, especially because in the early days, you're not necessarily able to hire people who are exceptionally skilled or kind of like those really A players. And it's just, sometimes you can, but sometimes it's just a question of the robustness of your hiring process and also the salaries that you're able to pay when you're only a six-figure business. You're just not necessarily exposed to what other people can do if they're put in the right position. So a lot of times you just develop the skill and you have this positive reinforcement from doing a lot of things yourself really well. And it becomes difficult to essentially break that when you get to a certain point and say, okay, there are certain things I just need to be okay with them maybe not being done to the level that I would do them. And those incremental improvements are just not worth it. I need to focus on the higher leverage things. So apply the Pareto principle essentially. But that's a very difficult kind of cognitive transition for people to go through when you've been rewarded for doing things a certain way for a long time that got you here. You have to just completely break out of that mentality. It's tough.
Especially with super high achieving, type A, very driven individuals, it's really hard to ask them to step back and put things in place to actually get to the next level. So another question I have for you is, you talk about just this right level of acquisition. What is that?
I think it's about understanding sustainably what a business can actually invest in acquisition. There's a multiple angles to it. Part of it is just understanding how much can be spent on acquiring a customer relative to how much profit will actually be derived from that customer over their lifetime. The second piece is also making sure that it's not a question of, if I can break even on a customer I acquire over 24 months, that's great, but I need cash flow next month. So it's also balancing that with the cash flow side. And the third piece of it is making sure that operationally you're able to support that. I think some people get a little bit gung-ho about scaling as much as possible. And if you're, say, in the info product world, that might not be as challenging because it's a digital product. It doesn't run out of space. If you're in e-commerce, you can have supply chain issues. And if you're in the service business, then you need to be able to scale people. And that's incredibly hard to scale. It really comes down to making sure that the operational side can keep up with the revenue side.
Yeah. And final question for the audience. I've really studied your journey, and you've acquired an unusual combination of skills that you've actually implemented to be extremely successful. Because initially medicine, then CPA, and now you're working at a startup and e-com, and now you're a performance marketing agency. What is your take-home message? Because a lot of people coming out of school these days, the job market is just bleak, and I think a lot of people are going to be forced to be entrepreneurs. So what is your message of inspiration for them?
I'd say that there's really two things to try to focus on to be able to give yourself the best shot at being an entrepreneur. The first one is being cognizant of mixing and matching different skills, especially when they aren't often seen together. There's value to obviously being a specialist, but I think as an entrepreneur, you're a lot better off being what I'll call a super generalist. So there aren't many CFOs out there who know how to run Facebook ads like I do. So being able to bridge those two skills, extremely rare, and it puts me in a very unique position to be able to work with brands in a way that really nobody else can. And the second piece of it is to recognize the skills that are most likely to drive value for people. At the end of the day, the reason I went from working just in the accounting side and then into the e-commerce side and then all the way up to the ads is because I was just trying to work my way up the value chain. So I was like, how do I drive more value for my employer? How do I do more things that'll be more beneficial for the company? And that's what guided my journey. It wasn't really as much as me deciding what to do, as much as me just like a bloodhound, just chasing where the value was and acquiring the skills necessary there. And that usually won't lead you astray.
Yeah. How can people connect with you, follow you on social media, and learn more about you?
The social media profiles are probably the best place. Twitter or X, LinkedIn, those ones work well. Abir, if you search Abir, usually there aren't many people named like me. So ABIR, Abir CFO, or Abir CPA, depending on the platform. Usually I'm there.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on. And I really enjoyed your journey and how you've taken your experiences and created a very unique skill set.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Kay Jewelers Black Friday sale is on. Now's the time to get up to 50% off Black Friday deals. With savings this big, you can get gifts for everyone on your list. Plus, if Black Friday lines aren't your thing, skip them. At Kay, you can buy online and pick up in store or get free shipping right to your home. This holiday season, unwrap love and savings with Kay. Exclusions apply. See Kay.com/exclusions for details.